Hello, brothers, sisters, and friends, and welcome to the Fight Like Hell podcast. This is the official podcast of the National Association of Letter Carriers, the union that represents over 290,000 active and retired letter carriers employed by the United States Postal Service. I'm your host, Ed Morgan, and with me, as always, is our national president, Brian Renfro. Hey, Brian, how are you this week?
Hey, Eddie, doing fantastic.
We
Got
have
another good episode here.
Yeah, really good episode. I was jumping in and got excited about it. Route inspections. This is going to be a really good episode. I think we're going to break it into a two-parter since you and Ron got out there and really went thoroughly through the whole route inspection process at whatever level you're at in terms of being a union member, whether you're a carrier, whether this is your first time as a steward going through a route inspection process coming up, whether you've been through it a few times as a steward, whether you need a refresher as a branch leader. These are going to be two really good episodes for you to dig in, and that episode's going to find you where you're at as a union member and a letter carrier.
Yeah, it's an important topic. I mean, as we sit here in December, no one's going through this right now. But come early next year, a lot of people will. And as you mentioned, Ron is fantastic. He's knows more about this stuff than anybody. And it's something that's kind of near and dear to me. I've worked on basically my whole career and time here at headquarters. So, as you said, we tried really hard to hit everybody from, the letter carrier that's going through the inspection to the shop steward to, those that may be handling grievances at formal step A and anyone in the branches. We even talked about kind of what these cases look like when they get to regional arbitration. So, really dove deep, and I think breaking it into two episodes is probably the best way to go.
Yeah. Give you guys a break.
Yep.
So what's happening up in headquarters this week?
Yeah, we got a lot going on. Coming, the executive council will be here a few days this week. We've got some members of the council that are here, pretty much the whole week working on their subcommittee stuff for collective bargaining. After we had the national RAP session and had a really productive time there, they've been able to take away a lot of the discussion and input that we got from our branch and state leaders. So they're working on that. We also this upcoming week on Thursday, I think it is, we are going to meet as a council, and we primarily talk about the economic pieces of collective bargaining. So, we got a lot of stuff going on, but we stay focused on that preparation for collective bargaining. And this week will be really important to have our council members here and dedicate a lot of time to that.
Good stuff. Speaking about the RAP session, we do have a page on the website dedicated to everything about the RAP session. I'm going to ask our producer, Sarah, to hook a link up to this podcast so that you can check out all one-stop shop for everybody. I have one page on it. I'll have all our podcasts. We actually have President Renfro's address to the branch presidents that were there, the full address, and any other all information that you wanted to get from the RAP session is there in one place, and you're going to find it in the link in the description.
Yeah, take advantage of that for those that obviously the RAP session per our Constitution is for our branch and state leaders, but we've tried to make as much as we possibly could available to all our members, including the RAP that I did on Sunday, where, as we've talked about on the podcast, I covered, three really big picture challenges or priorities for us as a union going forward. So encourage everyone to go there and check it out. There's a lot of things, about your job and about what faces our union in the not just immediate, but kind of long-term future that should be of interest to you.
Speaking about the RAP session, I want to bring this up because we had some vultures hanging around, and they were trying to promote their OWCP business, and they were throwing brochures in the toilet, over by the sink, and they were trying to hand them out on the sly, and they were trying to get into each and any training that we had. and you'll find them at the branch level offering a TV or try to jump into your fundraiser and offer this money. And just really want to get your opinion on this. These snake oil salesmen, these vultures that go and pick, they might have some great information, but that is going to come at a cost. There's always going to be a bill at the end of whatever they're doing for you. And, just really want to talk about what the NALC provides in terms of representation in that OWCP process.
Yeah, Eddie, you used the words that are appropriate, I think, vultures and snake oil salesmen. I have other words that I use to describe these people. But I think it's really important to point out and recognize our union provides the highest level OWCP representation that any federal worker in this country has access to. We have, over the years, intentionally built a network. We have regional workers' compensation assistants. We've got, over a dozen of them now. We've got at the branch level, many of our branches have OWCP representatives that we've continued to provide training, and we do it, and it's just part of what we do as a union representing our members. No other union does it anywhere close to the level we do. People, primarily attorneys and others that provide this type of representation, they often are looking for clients, of course, and we represent the largest segment of injured federal workers. That OWCP processes more claims for letter carriers than they do for any other class or category of federal workers. So on one hand, it's natural, I guess understandable, that they would have an interest in gaining access to representing our members. However, most of these people charge a significant percentage of your benefit. The union does not do that, and we provide better representation. And where we really come into, get into dangerous territory, is through some of the tactics that these people often use, where, as you mentioned, they'll approach a branch and say, hey, if you let me come in and have access to our members, we'll raffle and give this away, or I'll provide food for, your union meeting or whatever. I'm going to say this in the strongest possible terms. If you are a branch leader out there and you are approached by one of these people, there is only one answer to give them, and that answer is no. No, there is nothing that any of these people can give representation-wise to our members that our union does not already provide, and you can put yourself and your branch in a very vulnerable situation, particularly if you take something in exchange for granting them access to our members. So when it comes to these snake oil salesmen, vultures, that show up at meetings or events like this, or they contact you locally, tell them no. Our network is strong. The representation we provide is unmatched. No other federal employees that are covered by the FECA has access to the type of representation we provide. We are committed to continuing to strengthen that network, and there is simply no place for people that come in and want to prey on our members, and in particular, those that come in and want to somehow use some way to, frankly, bribe the leadership at whatever level of our union to gain access to our members. Tell them no. If you are a letter carrier out there and you have been injured on the job, let your branch leaders know, contact your NBA offices. That network is there for you, and we can assure you that you will get high quality representation.
Yeah, well said. We put this podcast out a few days early, just in case you're one of those procrastinators that we talked about. I've been there, but now's the time. Open season is open until Monday, December 8th. The end of the day, Monday, that's it. You won't be able to make any more changes for the year. Make sure that you're doing the right decision for yourself. Make sure you're taking a look at the NALC Health Benefit Plan. If you have any FSA, flexible spending account stuff that you got to get squared away, make sure you're doing that. Make sure you're talking to the carrier to the left and to the right of you while you're casing mail. Make sure that they're doing that. If you're listening to this after December 8th, too bad. Make sure you're taking care of yourself, please. I know you're busy. I know you're carrying a lot of mail right now, and you know you have your other obligations, but this is very important. Make sure you're taking a look at the health benefit plan that's right for you, and the one that's right for you is the NALC Health Benefit Plan.
Yeah, and Eddie, as you said, everybody's busy. Unfortunately, I'm sure there's a lot of people that'll be listening to this after December 8th, which is the last day of open season. But we just wanted to remind you again and put this out a couple days early just to give you a few days. So even if it's sort of last minute here, take advantage of the possible opportunity you have so that, you know, if there's a change you could make with health insurance, that's the NALC Health Benefit Plan. If you're not currently a member, I can assure you will be a positive change. But for all the benefits, you mentioned FSA, we've talked about that on the podcast. Just wanted to give you one last reminder as open season closes imminently from the date that we're recording and we'll release this podcast.
You were actually saying that the health benefit plan was getting a lot of questions into the phone bank there, yeah?
Yeah, no, we've had a lot of activity in terms of calls and you know people reaching out about open season, which is great. That means that our members are inquiring, and that's a good thing because you know our health plan again it's stronger than it's ever been, and we're definitely encouraged by the number of members that have reached out and tried to get information, and I'm sure ultimately will make the decision that's best for them and their families, and that decision in a lot of cases will be to become members of the only plan that's union owned and operated and designed. It's by letter carriers, run by letter carriers, and it exists for one reason, and that's to serve our members.
Before we get into the main segment of our podcast today, I just want to talk a little bit about Ron Osborne. I work with him here at headquarters. Great guy, really dedicated to our union and to the NALC and to the carriers on that workroom floor. You know, no offense to my stewards back at my station, Kevin and Doug, but if I ever needed a steward, if I was in trouble, I want Ron Osborne in my corner. He does a great job here. I know it's, you know, I sit him at lunch and we're talking, and you know, he's got telecons after hours, and he's still on the phone late at night when carriers are off the street. He just does a great job in that route adjustment process for us.
Yeah, Ron is fantastic, as you said. He's Ron's from Branch 14 in Louisville, Kentucky, and I said that right. That'll make the people there happy. Ron's done a lot of stuff over the years for the union, but he's, you know, really the person that has, you know, the most knowledge of anyone when it comes to all things route adjustment. And our last joint route adjustment process, when I was in the process of negotiating it back in 2020, 2021, we did a ton of testing, and Ron helped me through all of that. He was just a very critical piece of that, and then of course hired him to come to headquarters full time and work primarily on route adjustments. But you're exactly right. He's you know, you won't find a better person that's more dedicated to letter carriers, and that'll come through as our listeners hear from him.
Yeah, if you are watching this, you know, he's like a little kid getting their first haircut. He's moving all around, checking his notes. So visually, it'll be a fun episode, but audio, just an expert in the field and did a great job.
Yeah, no, he was fantastic as we knew he would be.
Just want to remind people, if you are listening to this podcast and you want to get more information, we're going to put a link in the description to our route adjustment website. It has a lot of the information that we have on there. And then in the members only portal, Ron will talk about it. We're going to have the presentation that he did during the 2024 convention. So go check out that. If you have any questions about route adjustments that you want answered on the podcast, send an email in at social@nalc.org and we'll answer your question on a future podcast. All right, let's go back to Brian and Ron. Take it away.
Ron, welcome to the Fight Like Hell podcast.
Thanks, Brian. It's good to be here. My first podcast that I've done from headquarters.
Awesome. So Ron is a assistant to the president for Administrative Affairs, but his primary responsibility, what takes up, almost, if not all of his time, depending on what time of year and what happens to be going on, is the topic that we're here to discuss today. And that's route inspections and route adjustments. So we're going to get into that. But before we do that, Ron, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, the things that you've been here at headquarters for a few years now working on route adjustments. Why don't you tell us about some of the things you've done over the course of your career leading up to what you do now?
All right. Thanks, Brian. Well, I came from Branch 14 in Louisville, Kentucky. That's Louisville, Kentucky. I was the former vice president there. Been through Formal A, Step B, a little bit of arbitration, steward, of course. Started my career back in 2000 as a casual carrier for about 6 months before I made PTF. I actually started in a 2-route office. About 8 months into that, I moved on up to the big city and went to the 4-route office. Became a steward in that 4-route office. And then we were actually, I believe the number was branch 1909 back then. And we merged with branch 14. And from there, I went to doing route inspections for the region 6, helping all throughout the region, giving classes at our trainings that we do regionally. Prior to that, I'm an ex-Army guy. I'm an old paratrooper, jump master, and counterintelligence soldier. So that's basically my history.
And as I mentioned earlier, in the time you've been here at headquarters for several years now, and when you had actually, before you worked for us full time, you helped me a lot with negotiating the last joint route adjustment process, and you've worked on it over the last several years, whether it was when we were in the joint adjustment process or the different types of things that we're dealing with now. And we'll get into all that. But I think, Ron, we should start with just at the most basic level with what route inspections are. Maybe a little bit of the history and what they are, what the processes have been, why they're necessary, why we've made some progress over the years, just maybe a little bit of history at a very basic level leading up to where we are now.
Okay, well, basically route inspections or even the joint process, they both have the same goal. The goal is to adjust the regular routes to as close to 8 hours as possible so that our letter carriers have an 8-hour assignment. Typically, during the joint processes, we're involved in that. We have a seat at the table and we're having joint decisions made. We have a little more input from the carriers. In the unilateral process, most of that is done by management. Almost all of it is done by management. And then we follow up with grievances if necessary to make sure that management did the right thing in the route count and inspection process, or RCI. You'll hear us use that term several times throughout.
Yeah, and I think an important thing for us to emphasize, for all our listeners out there, whether it's at different points in history where the Postal Service and management has conducted route inspections and then adjusted routes on their own and screwed up 99% of them, and we've then had to use the grievance arbitration procedure, or it's in the negotiation of joint processes, which we'll get into some details about the difference between the two. the union's goal has always been and continues to be the same thing, and that is that whatever process we have results in, for that carrier on that route, 8 hours work. It's really based in the principle that's in Article 34 of our contract, the principle of a fair day's work for a fair day's pay. And as we'll talk about, there's a lot of different factors that come into play. Any letter carrier listening to this knows every day is not the same. Every area is not the same. You've got all sorts of factors, from weather to traffic to the types of delivery. I mean, there's a million different variables when you consider the 100,000 plus routes that we have around the country. But that basic principle for us continues to be a fair day's work for a fair day's pay, and evaluating each route to 8 hours of work on average for the letter carrier on that route. So, Ron, let's talk about, we've already mentioned route counts and inspections, or what we typically call RCIs, which is a process the Postal Service does on their own. We have, of course, over the years, going back, I guess about 17 years now, we've had multiple agreements to jointly evaluate and adjust routes. So why don't you just explain the difference in those two processes, the kind of old traditional route count and inspection process that management does, and then the joint processes that we've been involved in over the years.
So the traditional process, the unilateral process, I'll call it, that management does, that comes straight out of the M39, Management of Delivery Services, comes right out of Chapter 2, that process. And management conducts route counts and inspections. They have all the different steps that are in Chapter 2 of the M39 that they have to follow. And all of those decisions that are being made, all of the conduct of the inspection itself, is all on management. They have total authority to make decisions. Then, of course, as we said earlier, we come along behind that and file the grievances for everything that they did wrong in that process. So the major difference when we jump into a joint process is that we have a seat at the table. And once we have that seat at the table, we make joint decisions, whereas management was making those unilateral decisions in the RCI. Nothing gets past our side in that. In other words, two people sit down at a table and they review documentation, they consult with carriers, they take all this information and they agree, just like we would in a Formal A discussion or whatever. We would either agree or we would disagree. Now, most of our joint processes, actually all of our joint processes, going all the way back to the IRAP, which I think was 2008. We've always had a dispute resolution process in there, to where if the teams that were actually doing these adjustments in the joint process disagree, then it would go up to the next level, kind of like our grievance procedure does, until it got to the national level, which it would ultimately be resolved. A lot faster than the grievance process, takes days instead of months. So that's a huge benefit. Also, that interaction with letter carriers, most letter carriers, in my experience anyway, are much more comfortable talking about their routes when they have a fellow letter carrier sitting right there with them, asking them questions along with management. In other words, management does not control how this whole thing goes. We get a chance to control the flow. Management, of course, has their opportunity to ask letter carriers whatever questions they want, and then the union comes back and asks whatever questions they want. They put that together and they make decisions based on the information that they have. Either way, with either process, the whole thing is based off of a letter carrier's performance. How have they been performing? How long does it take you in the office? How long does it take you on the street? That's the baseline. And then from there, we go up or down. You talk about deductions, you talk about additions, what did we miss? And we'll get into that a little bit more when we get into some of the actual RCI process itself and talk about how we do the joint processes, and we'll go from there.
So you mentioned in a joint process, it's basically 50-50 management and union, and we have a representative, Postal Service has a representative, and literally every single decision, whether that's in the evaluation of a route or that's in how a route is ultimately adjusted or things to do with the process to determine both of those, is a 50-50 decision. You mentioned the dispute resolution process. So you and I both have, over the years, served at literally every level of these processes, from locally to district level. For me, and I've done this really the entire 15 years I've been here at headquarters. You, the last few years, have dealt with these disputes that come up to the headquarters level. And they are primarily, we get disputes for a couple of reasons. Sometimes, not often, but sometimes there's a legitimate, difficult issue or decision to make. Sometimes you have very unusual circumstances, and it's a legitimate, difficult decision to make. Probably more often, we have disputes that come up because management has taken some dumb position, right? That's probably the most common thing. And I think before we dive into the joint process, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a second, first, whether it's in a joint process or it's in an RCI where management's doing it on their own, we should discuss structurally what the root of a lot of these problems are on the management side. And, I know a lot of our listeners have some experience in these processes, and this will absolutely resonate with you. So the way management is structured, they have, of course, their operations people, which are people at all levels that, are responsible for mail processing, delivery, the way things operate. Then they have labor relations folks. There's a whole bunch of them we deal with here at headquarters. A lot of, of course, our national business agents deal with the labor relations people at the area level, at the district level. Many of our branches out there deal with labor relations people at the district level. There's, for a long time now, been sort of a, I don't know how you describe it, maybe a tug of war between labor relations and operations over there. So why don't you just describe, you have more direct experience with this and seeing this firsthand than anybody else. But why don't you just talk a little bit about that dynamic and, frankly, often conflict that, at least in recent years, has been the primary source of some of the issues that we've had.
Well, I guess the best way to describe it, Brian, is ops is usually the one that spills the milk on the floor, and then labor comes along with a mop or attempts to clean it up. That's usually the way that it works. Labor is more concerned with the contractual provisions, which if you're grieving route counts and inspection, all that's going to fall under Article 19, which incorporates the M39 and the M41, our M documents that we have, our previous step fours going all the way back to the 70s, a lot of which are still just as important today as they were back then and apply the same as they did back then. Labor takes a look at those things, and they look at it of what they can potentially win or not win. Ops takes more of an approach of looking at where they can cut time. Where can we get time out of these routes? How can we reduce the number of routes? That's their approach, and it's often misguided. I would love it if the operations staff spent more time learning some of the labor staff's duties so that we could cut some of these things off. And in comparison, a lot of times with these joint processes that we've had over the years, a lot of these ops folks get an education as far as how the union looks at it and how we would deal with labor. And we get some smarter ops folks in there. But then, of course, we get out of the joint process, we go back to RCI, and they all go through their brainwashing period, and it's right back to the way it was, cut, and then we file the grievances.
Yeah, your analogy was good. Unfortunately, sometimes that milk spill might be a milk truck spilling, and the mop that the labor folks come along with is a Swiffer. So that's when we really have problems. So currently, we do not have a large national joint route adjustment process in place. We do have an agreement that we're using in when our sorting and delivery centers are implemented. That continues. We are in discussions with the Postal Service about doing another joint process in the future. So, Ron, I just want to kind of quickly hit on a couple of things related to a joint process. Then we're going to spend most of our time on the route count and inspection. But in a joint process, we've already talked about the union is involved. There's a union and a management representative basically at each level, from locally to at the district level and the area level and on up to headquarters. But I wanted to talk a little about how each letter carrier on each route is involved in that joint process, and maybe how that differs from what they experience in a chapter 2, a RCI, because that is one of the primary reasons that we've gotten into joint agreements and tried to make them better over the years, is to make it better for the letter carrier, so it's less invasive and they have more input that'll be listened to and so on. So why don't you talk about what each letter carrier on each route, kind of what their role and how they're involved in a joint process.
So typically in the joint processes, we have a structure in that process which involves varying different levels. You of course have the letter carrier, and then you have a person in the office that the letter carrier's in, we call the local contact. And usually there are two. There's one on management side and there's one on the NALC side. And then we have the route evaluation adjustment teams, which is a manager and an NALC person. And it goes up to area teams, regional teams, all the way up to the headquarters level, and they're paired off. Well, it all starts with the letter carrier. Like I said before, the performance of the letter carrier is recorded in some way, means, or fashion. The clock rings are there. What has been demonstrated over whatever period of time is picked in a joint process to evaluate. Each of those teams and those local contacts particularly are involved with the individual letter carrier to find information, get that information, and make decisions. So the letter carrier gets consulted with on the value of their route. We'll take and I'm going to say we, I'm an old route evaluation and adjustment team guy, so I'll say we would gather the information that we have for a particular time period. Let's say it's 1 month time period, the month of March. For the month of March, we've looked at the carrier's office clock rings, we've looked at the carrier's street clock rings, and we got a basic picture. Let's say the route looks like it's running about 8.5 hours. We're going to take all the information that we have, the fixed office time, the volume levels, the type of route it is, whether it's a mounted route, whether it's a case and carry route. And we're going to take all of that and put it together in kind of a spreadsheet or on a form. And we're going to get with that letter carrier and ask them questions about it. Does this look representative of your route, of what is a normal day on your route? And then, of course, the letter carrier is going to come back and say, well, here's what you're missing, what you don't see. Maybe there were clock ring errors. Maybe management's recording clock rings differently than they should be, because ultimately, at the end of the day, management has the final say on clock rings, even after we make them. That information is then taken, and the REIT team, will put together, come up with an evaluated time for a carrier's route. That's step one for the carriers in the process. Once all that's put together for all the routes in a particular zone, then we'll have evaluated times. Those times are then shared back with the letter carrier, what the team decided. This is what we think the value of your route is, the office and the street time. Then from there, those numbers go into the adjustment process. And if we've got 5 9-hour routes in a zone, and 3 that are 7 hours or whatever, we're going to have to move territory in there. So we'll use different techniques. There's a couple of programs that are used to actually adjust routes. One being, it's called DOIS, DOIS, which is Delivery Operations Information System. The other is the CORE program, which a lot of people have heard and a lot of people are scared of, and that's Carrier Optimal Routing. One of those two programs is used to either manually move the territory or use like CORE to move the territory and generate lines of travel and things like that. Then we come back once we've made those proposed adjustments, and we talk to the letter carrier again about what we're proposing. This is what it looks like we're going to do with your route. We're either going to take an hour off of you, we're going to take these streets off of you, we're going to take these collection boxes off of you, whatever the work function may be. Or in the reverse, we're going to add these things to you because your route's a little bit short to get you as close to 8 hours as possible. Okay? And the carrier gets input on that. You tell us exactly what it is that you think, whether that works, whether that doesn't work. You tell us whether, okay, we've got you going the wrong way down a one-way street, or maybe the territory that we've proposed to put on that route or move from that route, maybe the box is on the back of the house instead of on the front of the house. So we can't do it that way. It's critically important. In fact, it's the most important thing, is to talk with the letter carrier to get the reality, because that's the person that's on the street delivering the mail every day. You know where the dog is, you know where the potholes are, you know the right way to deliver this route. Yes, everybody follows the instructions of management and does it the way they say, but at the end of the day, it's the letter carrier that actually knows the route better than anybody. So that's the letter carrier's part of this, the most important part.
Yeah, and I can, speak to, and you can too, and so many people around the country that have been involved in working on different teams and adjusting routes.
Mm-hmm.
It's an invaluable piece of the process. As we talked about earlier, there's so many variables that are out there, and those are the type things that the team learns, from talking to the letter carrier at those different points in the process. So as I said, we don't currently have a joint process in place nationally. We are actively discussing what one would look like in the future. With the Postal Service, the approach is basically the same. We look at our past joint processes, of which we've now had 6, I think, over the years, going back to 2008. And we take the things that have worked well and, try to improve on the, learn some lessons from certain things. But ultimately, again, the goal is 8-hour routes, and to make it as easy, as efficient a process and as minimally invasive, on the letter carrier as we possibly can. So hopefully, here in it's December, so it's probably not likely it happens in 2025. But we're pretty optimistic about the conversations we've been having, and hopefully we're able to get to agreement on a joint process. But in the meantime, absent that joint process, we have a process that we've talked about here a couple of times called route count and inspection that comes from one of the Postal Service's handbooks. It's the M39. It's called Management of Delivery Services. It lays out a frankly pretty complicated process of evaluating and adjusting routes. Through Article 19 of our agreement, this language becomes part of our collective bargaining agreement. So when the Postal Service conducts one of these, they are required to comply with that, no different than they're required to pay us a certain amount per Article 9 of our collective bargaining agreement, or the overtime rules in Article 8, or the bidding provisions in Article 41, seniority in Article 41. So it's a part of our agreement, just like anything else. And, while no one's going to have these happening in December, there's a pretty good chance that some of you out there listening in January, February, or sometime in the spring of 2026 will have a route count and inspection done. So, Ron, I guess what I'd like us to do is, we'll kind of walk through the different phases of it here in a minute, but I want to start with training because, the whole purpose of us having this discussion, the purpose of if you open up your postal records over the last year or so, you'll see a lot of articles, mostly in the contract talk section, about this process. But training is really, really important that our members understand what the process is and sort of what their role is, what they should look for. Because believe it or not, when management conducts these things, they are out, no matter what words come out of their mouth. We've got decades of history that show that their one goal is to make your route as short as they possibly can on paper, but as long as it is on the street, because they have goals that they're trying to reach, and they're frankly not very good about following their own process. It's in their own handbook. So, Ron, let's start with training. Like, what's available out there, for members, and if someone has one of these coming up at some point in the future, what's out there for them, and what's the type of stuff that they could look for?
Okay, Brian. Well, typically, over the past several years, actually going back probably to the 70s and the 80s, the regions, one of the 15 regions, each one of them have done their own route count and inspection training. Most all of them have a program. It's been modified a little bit with things that have changed over the years. If you go back, if you get an opportunity to actually go look at the M39, that thing came from 1978, and it is basically unchanged in the way the process works. So the trainings that we've been doing over the years, regionally, some branches have their own training. Most of the time, you can contact your regional office. They will get you somebody down there to do the training. We've got several resources at our fingertips when it comes to route count and inspection training. So what I encourage everyone to do is go to NALC.org. You can go under the workplace resources, the city delivery tab, and there's a whole section on route adjustments there. There's three main pieces, or three main publications that we've got in there. One is the 2018 guide to route inspections, which breaks down everything from start to finish. It's kind of a little bit the order jumps, front to back a little bit. Sometimes it'll go from the middle and then go to the back and then go back to the front. But it's got every bit of the information that you need in there, as far as filing grievances, as far as what the carrier's duties are, as far as what management's responsibilities are. Also, we have the 2012 Route Protection Program, which that was developed immediately following discussions and talks about getting into a joint process. And if I remember correctly, and you correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, I think it was 2004 was when those discussions started, and there were high hopes that there was going to be that first joint route adjustment process, and then it fell through. So we came immediately right back with the 2012 guide. Okay, if you're not going to talk to us about a joint process, we're going to educate our people. And that's got some phenomenal information in there about route protection and how letter carriers can protect their assignments. The third piece that we have on the website is the CORE guide, which CORE is the most commonly used program now to actually move territory on routes. And it is very complex. It has a lot of moving parts. The training to actually use the program is a week to 2 weeks long to actually learn how to use it. But that was, I think, if I'm not mistaken, M1766, I think is the number if you want to look it up. It breaks down everything about that program, how it works, the documents it spits out, how it moves territory, how it does lines of travel. That's a great resource. So I encourage everybody to go in there and look at that. Also, nationally, of course, I like to use the 2024 convention presentation that we did. And I've sent that out all through the regions to a lot of branches, to individual letter carriers that have called me or emailed me. And that's what I'm actually going to, while we're having this conversation, I'm going to use that as kind of my outline, because what it does is break down the entire process from start to finish in the before the count, during the count, and the after the count. And it references all of the sections of the M39, some of the M documents that we have, which those are located in our materials reference system, which is also under those workplace resources. There's a ton of information that is in there. We've probably got more information in the MRS and through these training documents that we've got in the city delivery than we do any other subject that we deal with. I would even dare say there's more in there than Article 8 because it's so massive and there's so much information involved in it, and it's such a complex process. So I encourage everybody, go there, ask your business agent offices for training, reach out to them. If they need assistance from the headquarters, we'll be glad to provide that assistance to them. I've done trainings over the years when I first started with route counts and inspections, and we've got different versions that go from maybe a 2-hour training on how to fill out an 1838C all the way to a 3-day training that covers everything front to back and all the grievances that could possibly be involved. Talking to both letter carriers that are being inspected and to stewards or to union representatives that are actually going to be filing these grievances. It's very complex. The case files, it's not unusual to have a 10,000 page case file because they are huge, the amount of information that is in there. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about that later as we get into it.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the publications because this is a process that hasn't really changed a lot over the years. There's been a couple of things. You mentioned CORE, obviously, when that program was developed, that was a whole back in the, I guess, mid to late 2000s. That was a pretty significant piece. But those publications, even though several of them were done, really 2011, 2012, under then Director of City Delivery Lou Jurass, and some young knucklehead staffer did most of the work on them back then. They've not changed. We've updated them a couple times, but the updates have been fairly minor, because the process really hasn't changed much over the years. So we definitely encourage you to dig in. And I tell you that because if you end up with a 2012 version or the core book from 2011, that stuff is still relevant. So absolutely reach out. Go find those things on your own, but take advantage of the opportunities that are out there. Of course, you can always call your national business agent and communicate with your branch, and there's plenty of information that's there.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Fight Like Hell podcast. Please subscribe so that you don't miss an episode, and please share the podcast with your NALC brothers and sisters. You can follow the NALC on social media using Facebook, X, and Instagram. May your steward be by your side, and may the union have your back. Thanks for listening. See you soon.